Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Vice Chairman Kelly, would you mind blessing this meeting, please?
Everybody bow your heads. Dear God, we thank you, dear Father, for the opportunity you put before us today, God. We thank you for the trust that you've placed in each and every one of us to do the job that the citizens of Georgia expect us to do, Father. We ask that the work we do today be pleasing to you, and we ask that everything we do bring honor and glory to your name. In His name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much. So this is a brand new subcommittee, as most of you know, for the appropriations. This is over the Judicial, and we're excited. We're excited to dig into this budget, and today we'll be talking about the amended budget specifically. We'll have a future date for the big budget for next year. But welcome, members. Thank you for being here, and I don't want to delay us. I wanted to get us going. So first up today, Supreme Court. And from Supreme Court, looks like we're going to have Presiding Justice Peterson joining us. And I'm not sure if Mel will be helping you. And T? Yep, perfect.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Our amended budget requests are fairly straightforward. There's 4 of them. They're all pass-through funds where our actuals have just come in a little bit higher than the estimates at the time of building the FY26 budget. The first 10.1.1 is increasing funds for GBA rent, as that rent has increased. Second, 10.1.2 is increasing funds for the trooper agreement that we have with the Department of Public Safety for the trooper for the chief, consistent with higher billings from DPS. 10.1.3 is increased agency premiums from DOAS self-insurance, and 10.1.4 is an increase in agency premiums from the State Accounting Office. And I'm happy to go into more detail on any of those or whatever else you'd like me to talk about.
Great, thank you. I'll reserve my questions for a little bit later. Does anyone on the committee have any questions? I'll give you a minute. I know it's new. Track sheet's new to most of you. Chairman Gunner?
Okay, I'll ask a question. In 10.1.1, I know that's for the rental rates, but it also mentioned here the Capitol Police Security and Operation expenses. I know y'all had a study or something done. Can you briefly tell me what that was about?
So there has been a study done for appellate judge security. This is not a function of that. This is just GBA increased our rent and told us it was for security things. But there has been a study done around appellate judge security because the statewide judges, appellate and statewide business court, are the only judges where security is not provided by local law enforcement. And so that study principally focused on outside of the courthouse security. We do have a contractor who has been working with GBA to assess security issues at the building. With any new construction, you always discover that there are some challenges that you didn't anticipate, and identified some security issues that GBA has been working on. But to my knowledge, that is not an issue with this particular budget item.
Okay. And so y'all would not be asking for funds for, at least to your knowledge at this time, for beefing up the building where it has lapses?
To my knowledge, we do not have any requests for that at this time.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk offline, not in a public meeting, about
Right.
the specific lapses, but I don't obviously want to get into those in a public meeting.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Justice, thank you for being here with us today. These are pretty straightforward. I guess the only question I have is in terms of maybe the process for when GBA raise these. Do you know what the kind of term, like the time period of y'all's lease is? Like today, are y'all like January 1 to December 31, and they've hit y'all with an increase that kind of interferes with our budget cycle? Or I guess I'm just curious, are we going to end up having this every year, needing to do this if GBA kind of escalates, to make it up in the amended?
So the lease is aligned with the fiscal year, but our budget requests are submitted before we know what that new number is going to be. So hence the disconnect.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Member Chet?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for being here. Just to follow up on that, is it a 3% increase every year? Do we have an idea, or is it do we have no?
It's not set. It's we find out when GBA sends us a bill, and it's not one of those things where we can go out and shop it either.
It's not negotiable.
So, yeah. Well, we're not going to be delinquent in our rental payments.
Anyone have any questions? Number 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Justice Peterson. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
How is the court doing in terms of turnover rates for the staff, for the attorney staff and the non-attorney staff?
So we definitely have been struggling with turnover, particularly among professional staff. And when we come to the FY26 budget, there is an item in there where we're asking for some funding to help address retention issues. But we try not to make those sorts of asks in the amended.
Understood. Can you give us some flavor for?
So staff attorneys, which is sort of where the rubber meets the road for us on a lot of things. Since FY20, we've experienced 72% turnover. And those are permanent positions. We're not even including the term clerks that are supposed to cycle in and out every year, because that's not a true, retention issue. But among the permanent staff attorneys, we have 2 per chambers and then 7 or 8 in central staff. We've had 72% turnover since FY20.
How many openings do you have right now?
At least 1. We've filled most of our openings through cannibalizing central staff, essentially, and so we just hired 2 new people in central staff to replace vacancies. It is taking us considerably longer to hire than it has historically. 4 to 6 months, that sort of thing, which is a long time to have a vacancy in a position like that.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I'll just go through, 1011 rent rate went up. 1012 State Patrol Trooper Agreement went up a little bit, and that's for Chief Justice, right?
Yes,
and then 1013 and 1014 are really just agency premiums that came due.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Give it another chance. Anyone else? We'll save them all for the big budget coming up.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And we'll just primarily, we're going to go to Judicial Council next.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'll stay right here and let Andrew.
so for those of you, that's section 6, page 2 of 20. Go ahead.
So there's definitely more substance here to speak to. And just going by my tracking sheet, the first item is 6.4.1 under Judicial Council. And when it says Judicial Council, this is really Administrative Office of the Courts, which provides services to all classes of court within the judicial system. And this first point 6.4.1, increase funds for judicial security initiatives. What that is last year we had Senate Bill 508, which called for protecting the personally identifiable information of judges. As we have worked, that bill goes into effect July 1. As we have worked on implementation, particularly with local governments, with ACCG and GMA, we realized that the structure we had set up in that bill potentially created more problems than it solved, because what it would essentially call for is the creation of a single database of judges and their personally identifiable information. and then a sharing of at least portions of that database with the agencies that were supposed to restrict it so that they would know whose information to restrict. But the creation of the database presents some security issues of their own, which is what this number was designed to address, essentially providing IT security, things to safeguard that. But we are actually coming with another piece of legislation this year to refine that approach so that instead of creating a centralized database that then would be shared, it's a more streamlined, just judges communicate directly with particular agencies. In the event, and Chairman Gunner, I suspect you will see that hopefully this week. But in the event that that bill passes, much of this line would prove unnecessary. Some of it still would be necessary, but much of it would be unnecessary. I know that that is a kind of a fuzzy explanation at the moment, and as soon as we get a clearer sense of the legislation, we'll be able to refine that. But we would ask, because the law that's on the books right now does go into effect July 1, if that winds up being the responsibility that AOC has to do, then we do have to safeguard that information, and that will cost money.
Yeah, and so, yeah, at the end, we'll fund it. If things change, this bill passes and changes, we'll pull it back out and
Exactly.
refund whatever the future looks like.
Perfect.
Any questions specifically to that one? 641. Okay, go ahead.
6.4.2 is requesting 3 IT positions, and the number here, 106, may look small for 3 IT positions. That's because this would be an April 1 start date, so it's basically a quarter of the year. And those 3 positions are a systems engineer, an AV support specialist, and a court tools specialist. Again, the AOC is a services agency for courts, and there is just the IT load on AOC providing service to courts has dramatically increased over the last couple of years. As the new juvenile court case management system has come online, AOC is largely responsible for managing that, and so one of these 3 positions would be dedicated to the juvenile, the JCATS system. And then the other 2 really just dramatically increased need for the IT services that AOC provides to the courts. We've seen a 145% increase in overdue tickets providing service in the last year. And so this is just an effort to try and build that capacity back in to meet the demand.
And you say, like the SLA from a technology perspective, tickets is what you're saying. So you open like an IT ticket, it's not meeting the SLAs that you guys have set.
That's correct. I recognize that when I'm talking about IT, I am both in a space that I am not terribly familiar with, and it is a space of the chairman's expertise. So I'm not sure what SLA.
Yeah, like basically how much time it takes your standard to complete the ticket.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a computer problem. I have a day to fix it. It takes 2 days to fix it.
Right. But, if you have a trial that's ongoing and you need, something in order to keep that trial going, everybody sits until that gets addressed. So.
Yeah. Any questions on that for the committee? I do want to go back to 641 real fast just before. I know that you're asking for the 177,000. Can you just, I think there's 2 items that's really broken into 2 segments. Can you just dive into that for a quick second?
Of course. So 100 of that is IT-related build-out and startup costs for actually the information security around that database. And then it would be a quarter funding for 2 positions. One would be an IT position to coordinate and manage all of that. And another would be a threat assessment and tracking position. That's the one that even if we are able to adjust the law, that's the one that we still would need.
Yeah, like the cybersecurity.
That's correct.
Okay.
We presently have no one that tracks threats against judges at the state level. There's 1,600 judges, state level judges in Georgia. Threats against federal judges are tracked by the U.S. Marshals, and we've seen a really dramatic increase in threats against federal judges over the last several years. And just anecdotally, based on the reports that we hear, we expect that is what is also happening with state judges, but there's no mechanism to track that presently.
All right. Any questions on 6.4, Judicial Council? Number 16?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious on the threat issue. Is there a common way that the threats are made so that they are trackable?
So there's very different types of threats. It's not infrequent that threats will be made during a court proceeding by someone who becomes very upset, and I'm sure Chairman Gunner can speak to that based on his past experience. But then you also have people external to court proceedings who are making threats. That often happens on social media and otherwise on the internet. That's a piece that's just goes wholly untracked right now. If a judge has a Facebook page and somebody posts a threat there, then the judge may see it and call the sheriff's office. But short of something like that, there's just no mechanism to assess that for state judges at present.
Okay, so the idea is to have a central place where all that would be captured and tracked.
Essentially.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you. JQC Director Courtney Veal asked me to just make sure that y'all knew she was here in case y'all have any questions for them.
Great, thank you. Next up, we'll do Court of Appeals, Chief Judge Mercier, Judge Doyle, and Chris Walker, the CFO. For those of you tracking, it's Section 5, page 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Or afternoon.
Yeah, I feel like it's morning. I've lost all track of time today. Good afternoon. All right, I will start with these, and if you need to stop me or have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Starting with 5.1.1, that's the increased funds for the allotted judges' pay to recognize the semi-monthly pay periods. When that week went in at the end of June, we get paid on it's twice a month, so we just added it in to make it a full pay period. So that's what that $23,840 is. The 5.1.2, the increase in funds for annual leave. It says conversion payouts, but what it really should just be is annual leave payouts. That represents the 45 days, not anything else, just the 45 days that we are required to pay out, and that can average as little as $30,000 in a year to as much as $140,000 a year, depending on who leaves. Those are people who typically retire. Or move on to other employment. And then the last thing on our amended, the 5.1.3, the increased funds for mandatory website updates, we are going to be required, at least at this point, unless something changes, to do some federal ADA compliance, and that pertains to our docketing, our e-filing, and our public-facing web pages, and that's literally just to comply with that. And those are our amended requests.
Great, thank you. Vice Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Judge Mercier. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
What is the date for when we have to be in compliance with the ADA?
Do you know the date?
We don't have a date.
They haven't given us a date yet. We just know that if it's in 2026, which is I think what we thought, 2026, we'd have to start in 2025 to be compliant.
Okay. And that's not unique to the judiciary.
That is
that's
not,
for all. That's going to be for all government
that's
websites.
Everybody.
Correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. So if that doesn't come to fruition in 2026, we certainly would not be asking for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll go ahead and start while people think. So, related to 5.1.1 on the semi-monthly pay period. So last year, it was allocated for one week of the pay period, right?
Right.
So, or 8 days, 7.5 days of the pay period.
Right.
So pay periods are twice a month.
Right.
15th and 30th, or 15th and last day.
Right.
So this is really just looking to up that a little bit to a pay period versus 1/2 of a pay period.
Correct. That's it.
Okay. Are there any questions on that piece of it? We already allocated half a pay period. They're just looking to fill it out with a full pay period. And then on 512, the annual leave, I know we gave money in the past, I think $198,000 in 2023. I think that's something we talked about before.
Right.
What does that look like? What's that account have in it today versus how many payouts have you had? And for why you're looking for $80,000 more. I don't know if we've received that maybe. I don't remember. If we haven't received it, that'd be something we still want to see.
I think Anna and I spoke about it.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No,
Chris
you're good.
Walker, good to see you again.
Too.
And we talked about that. As far as it being in a specific account, it's charged off in, was it 5002 or whatever, but the money's not sitting there in a specific account. It's in personal services. And many times, while that money is put in as part of a personal service package, as you go through the years and ebbs and flows in the ups and downs in personal services, if it's a COLA and there's a cutoff on X date and you have more positions that you're actually having to pay out a COLA to than what were originally funded, that's what happens. You come into a situation where you may not have the full benefit of the original amount of money that someone was intending to put in for that specific purpose. So,
Do you have an idea of what the balance is today?
I'd have to go back and do a complete reconciliation of all that to look at it, and then we'd also have to consider those other items in the personal services accounts. Everything from benefits to insurance to to all that.
Right.
And we're glad to do so if we need to.
We'll talk offline. I don't want to burden you with a ton of work, but I also want to have an idea what that looks like so we can get a better plan, I think, around that.
Sure.
I think that's something that I'm trying to do is know what to expect, when to expect it.
And unfortunately, that's the bad part.
That's going to be difficult, right? I get that.
Yeah, these annual leave payouts, we don't ever know who's retiring or necessarily when they're retiring or who's leaving when, and sort of that's kind of where we get with these things. But
All right. And then finally, on the ADA, that's something, I think we're going to look at a broader conversation because there's a lot of, all the courts need to do it and all the government websites need to do it. So
Of course.
I
And
think it makes sense. We'll figure that one out as we get there.
we understand completely. We just put it there to make sure that we could, in fact, comply.
Sure. Yeah, we want to be in compliance.
Correct.
Did that stimulate any questions from the members of the committee? All right. Thank you so much for your
All right,
time.
Thank you.
And next up will be Superior Court. Judge Ann Harris from Cobb County, welcome. And Charles Miller, the Budget Director.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. I'll just, the good news is I think my report will be short because actually we're giving back appropriations. The first thing at 9.3.1 was because the Douglas judgeship was ultimately not created last year. We're ceding back the $218,555 that was allocated. It was allocated, but the judgeship itself, the bill did not end up passing. So that's the 218. And then the other three items, 9.3.2.3 and .4, are to just back out the initial setup funds for the new judgeships that were created for Atlantic and Coweta and Daugherty. So it's backing those setup funds out at about $15,000 apiece. And for the amended budget, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's great. We love when you're able to give us back money, so we really appreciate that. I'll go one quick question. So if the Douglas Circuit does get that judge this year, we'll just fill that in on the full
Yes, sir.
budget appropriately as we need to.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Are there any questions from the committee?
All right.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're cruising. Next up will be Council of Juvenile Court Judges, Kirsten Wallace, Eric Johnson, and Judge Neil Brunt.
Mr. Chairman, we were waiting on Judge Brunt, but we can go ahead, or if you need him.
You tell me, would you prefer to wait?
He was in the middle of a hearing, so I'm not so sure. He's in Cartersville.
Okay.
He said he wouldn't be able to make it until 3:30. I was
Well, come on down. We're not going to last that long. Yep. And for those of you, it's page 3 of 20, section 7. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. I'm Kirsten Wallace. I'm the Budget Director with the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. Like the Chairman mentioned, we are Section 7, page 7 of the document. And luckily, we're not requesting any additional funding. If it's okay, I would if it would be all right to kind of briefly explain our council and how we work and how we're broken up into 2 different programs.
That would be great.
Okay, so the first program we have is 7.1. That's the council's budget. We are the administrative arm for the juvenile court judges. Eric is our executive director, and then we have staff. We support all the juvenile court judges. Currently, we have 102 juvenile court judges, 20 associate juvenile court judges, and then 22 senior judges. So we are the support for those juvenile court judges. So that's our first program. That's the funding in that program. And then the second is the grants to counties for the juvenile court judges' salaries. This is actually based, well, part of it, the majority of it, is based on Code Section 151152. That's a formula that the juvenile courts receive grants from the state. And how that formula works, every judicial circuit receives a $100,000 grant to start off. And then it's based on a formula on the number of Superior Court judgeships within those circuits. So any circuits that have over 4 Superior Court judgeships, that circuit receives additional funding for the juvenile court grants. And how it works, say a circuit has 5 Superior Court judgeships, they would receive the $100,000 grant and then an additional $25,000. So it's $25,000 for every Superior Court judgeship over 4. So that's how that funding works. And then what else we have in that grants to counties, we also have the judicial retirement system, the juvenile court judges retirement. That payment comes out of that program as well. And then the salary supplements, which we had spoke about Friday. So if I can answer any questions, please let me know.
So Vice Chairman Kelly has a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you for the work our juvenile court judges do. I know it's difficult work. The $100,000 grant that the state sends, does every circuit automatically get that, or do they apply for it, and do all of them take $100,000, or is there some discretion as to what they can ask for?
Okay, so they have to request the funding, and we do it all based on appointment orders. So those appointment orders, we have to make sure there's a juvenile court judge within that circuit, which all of them have juvenile court judges. We do have 2 circuits that request less than $100,000. They request $80,000. The reason why those 2 judges in each circuit, or each judge in each circuit, only works part-time. They work 4 days a week, so they request $80,000 instead of the $100,000.
Have you ever seen a full-time judge where the county's requested less than $100,000?
No.
Okay.
If I could add to that question, which I thought obviously with 100,000 per circuit, and then based on the number of Superior Court judges, your bigger circuits are getting more of the money. In your other circuits, the counties are actually putting a lot of the money into the salaries. So the 100,000 has been, it started at 85 in 2000. I think in 2018, it went up to 100,000. So that's the state portion, but the counties are really picking up most of the salaries.
I thought I remembered a couple years back over in my area, the county had requested less when we had a full-time juvenile court judge, and I was having a hard time understanding why they were doing that. Maybe we can talk offline about that.
I think it was real quickly. I think there was a discrepancy in what they wanted to pay the judge, and
Okay.
the county only wanted, I think, 80, and we were saying you have 100,000. If the judge's salary is going to be 110 or 120, take the 100. So that might have been the discrepancy.
Thank you.
Whipper Chet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying here this morning. One question. So this is just judges' salaries in 7.2?
It's the grants that go towards the juvenile court judges' salaries.
So the counties are picking up all the courtroom?
Yes,
Staff?
if you look at, yes, that's correct. If you look at the code section 151152, it kind of gives a breakdown of everything and how the formula works with this number of Superior Court judgeships. But this funding can only be used for salaries, cannot be used for benefits, retirement, taxes. It can only be used for salaries.
Very
Yes, the counties are picking up all the other costs.
Thank you.
Chairman Gunner.
Okay, so that brings me to the question about retirement for juvenile court judges.
Right.
Is that provided by the counties also?
No, the state pays the portion of
The-
the, I'm sorry.
Yes, excuse me. When they changed the law to create this one judicial retirement system, they pretty much mandated, at least for the juvenile court judges, they had to be in the state retirement system. There used to be an option prior to that where you could stay in the local system or choose, but now you are mandated to be in the state retirement system. So,
But not JRS, you're talking about,
no, JRS.
oh, JRS.
Yes. State court judges, superior court judges, juvenile court judges, solicitors, and DAs make up that, and it is mandated, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we've
I'm sorry.
in the
Vice Chairman Kelly, I'm sorry.
didn't offend me. You may want to talk to Wilbur Chet down there though.
I was thinking about, yeah.
I know there have been some recently. Y'all have kind of pulled some data together. I think for Chairman Hatch and maybe for Chairman Tillery over in the Senate. How can y'all talk through some of that for us and how we're coming on some of those that data requests?
I would probably give this.
We submitted an email to both of you that had really a breakdown of what we've gotten so far. There was a dry run done, requested by Chairman Tillery, and it was basically just JCATS counties to see how much we could do with the data. We feel that it's good. We've had some lack of data in mostly the counties that had superior court clerks, because you have juvenile court clerks that work at the direction of the juvenile court, are hired by the juvenile. The superior court clerks, we were delinquent in providing, or they were delinquent in providing some of that data. But we feel like the data that's being requested, and we've been working with the administrative office of the courts and Ben Luke and Christy King to provide what was the chairman was requesting. And we did send I think over 2 or 3 documents that I think is a pretty good indicator of what we've got, where we are, where we need improvement.
And I appreciate y'all sending that to us. And the data y'all are sending, y'all have been able to send to us. Appreciate that. Certainly, we want to stay on top of that. How can we help y'all collect more of the data? Are there suggestions for us to help y'all collect more of that, maybe through our clerks or whomever? Do y'all have any suggestions on that?
In the legislation to collect the data last year, there was JCATS, which is a juvenile court activity tracking system that was developed through our council going back to the early 90s. That seems to be the best case management system out there for collecting, because it was done specifically for juvenile court. We had a hand in creating that. Unfortunately, because of local decision making by counties, not everyone has JCATS. There's Icon, Odyssey, and a couple of others. In the legislation last year, JCATS was in there, but some members were concerned that we were prioritizing a specific vendor. So that was removed by Senator Kirkpatrick. I know Chairman Wendell Willard, many years ago wanted to make JCATS the case management system for juvenile court, but then that whole interplay between the counties wanting to have a system where all their judges are using the same system as opposed to having, but the beauty of JCATS is it was developed for the juvenile courts, and the data that y'all want and that we want to give you is specifically there in a report that can be done like that. So if we could go to JCATS,
And do we fund last year? Did we fund appropriately for every county if they wanted to use JCATS?
There was some funding put in, I think some $600,000 to help. And we did pick up quite a bit of JCATS counties. I think that's in the documents we sent you. We went up to about 68 counties when we used to have about 50-something counties.
And so is there money left in that appropriation that's still sitting there since we put the 600 whatever in, hoping to get to everybody, and then we didn't? Is there still funds available from that?
That would be in the AOC.
Yeah, that would be under the
That
administrative. That was in a different budget with Ben Luke and Christy King out of the Administrative Office of the Courts. I don't know how much. I do know it was helpful because we picked up a lot of counties. Even Superior Court clerks were picking up JCATS.
Thank y'all.
Go ahead.
So we received the 600,000
Real
appropriations.
fast, introduce yourself real fast for me.
Sorry, yeah. I'm Andrew Zoll. I'm the Chief Budget Officer with the AOC. We received $600,000 appropriation in the amended budget. 400,000 of that is the annual license, which covers every court in the state. So we are asking for that in the general budget so that it will live within our budget, and that would cover every single court in the state. Currently, it's that statistically stated 68, with more coming online. We did, part of that appropriation was $250,000 to help with implementation for some counties. We do have some of that funds remaining for additional courts to come on board and implement with JCATS.
Do you know how much?
The last time I checked, I think we had 200,000 left for courts to implement, but I can double check that figure for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
And I think the numbers showed that maybe 14 counties weren't reporting anything. For Superior Court clerk wasn't reporting anything related to this. And that ties in really into one of my questions that I think we talked about was there's some funds tied to backlog, and I think last year there were funds tied to if a juvenile court judge did not have a backlog, they were paid like a bonus for not having a backlog, getting through their cases. But I think in some conversations, no one really knows what a backlog is. And so, or a backlog isn't defined, it's kind of decided on each judge. And so I think that's something that we need to look at from our perspective. Just keep in mind that we're paying a bonus to not have a backlog, but no one knows what a backlog is, and they're getting bonuses. So, and it's not much for each judge. It's not like, just windfall bonus, but it is something that we either need to define and set some standards around or take away. Just for chew that in your mind a little while and see where we land on that a little bit later. But that's all really tied to this JCATS and the reporting, right? So if your funding is, your bonus is tied to something and you have a Superior Court clerk who's not willing to file for you, then that's not really a good path forward either. So I think there's some work to do here.
And if you look at the budget acts for the last few years, we've kind of moved from backlogs because it was so hard to define, and Chairman Tillery was really helpful. And we're now concentrating on having a certification of a case management system so we can collect this data. And then later in April, that data is to be reported. If we're having the trouble getting it reported, we're still going to have a gap there where we're not going to have it.
Sure.
So
yeah.
that's where we really need to get help from y'all and strengthen getting, because it's there, it can be obtained. Even the other systems, Icon and Odyssey, if they work with the point person, Sean King from JCATS, they can help them, show them how to produce this data.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think for them to work on a backlog but not knowing what a backlog is, though, is still outside of the data. That's really us looking at it and determining if you have a backlog versus a judge today just really affirming, I don't have a backlog. That's something needs some work there. Representative Holcomb?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, on that, can you give us a sense, recognizing that there's variation built into the system and how quickly each individual judge moves cases along, of what's the typical average median, pick your word, caseload, and what's the typical average median time frame for a case to work through the system?
Ooh, that's something kind of
Complex.
hard to define exactly. I mean, we have a timeline in the code, but there are so many variables in terms of delays, continuances, missing reports that should be coming, doctor's report, psychological report. So it's kind of difficult to, well, we could try to talk to the judges and see what kind of numbers we're looking at in that area. It's very difficult because it just varies from, you have some areas where there may be delays because the SAG is working in 2 or 3 counties in that circuit and is not able to get to a particular, so we may have a continuance there till that SAG is able to move from that other juvenile case to the case that's now pending. So
Okay. That's the timing part, which I appreciate that can be a lot harder to manage. What about the caseload part? Can you give us some sense of what people are dealing with, or no?
It varies across the state. I mean, because we have some circuits that have more than one juvenile court judge, so it's hard to say, how many cases they have if you actually get down into the weeds of which county they are sitting over, whether those cases go under their name, if you will, and so on. So, I mean, we would be able to give you a round number for the circuits, but I wouldn't be able to per judge when there's circuits that have more than one juvenile court judge. Does that make sense?
It does, but it still seems like we should have some understanding of by judge how much workload that judge is producing.
Right.
well, where the circuits where we have, say Coweta, for example, because you've got a couple of different judges, then we are able to find out what the caseload was for that particular judge. That's part of the data that can be obtained through JCATS and through the case management system. So yeah, we're able to do that. Because a lot of times in these circuits with multi-judges, the judges, even though they're circuit-wide under the law, they get basically assigned to a particular county. So you have Coweta, where you have Meriwether County, then you have Coweta County and some of the other, so you have a judge basically staying in that county. The Alcovey Circuit, it has Newton and Walton. You have judges that are circuit-wide, but they're basically located in a particular county. So we are able to, through the JCATS in the case county, find how many cases that particular judge is hearing within delinquency, dependencies, and all the other sorts of cases.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate that the variables are tied together, because the staffing, if you have a massive caseload, then you're going to be slower, and that's going to delay ultimate resolution, whatever that looks like. So
Your rural judges are the ones really pinched, because we have one judge, and is barely making over 100,000, has 8 counties, the Okmulgee Circuit, and they basically spend the whole time going from county to county, which, if you know the Okmulgee, it ranges from Milledgeville all over across the I-20, north of I-20. So,
okay, thanks.
looking at juvenile court, the issue that always pops up is fiscal resources. Do we have the fiscal resources for staffing, for judges, for programs? That's just that's the issue in juvenile courts.
One other thing that was talked about, and we'll move on, I think, but a lot of what juvenile court does is, for me, a lot of foster care, a lot of adoption, almost to the adoption process that goes in Superior Court. And so we talked about reunification and the importance of reunification and the push there, but also the importance for permanency for these children. And I know, think the judge sent me some data, or someone did, related to the number one, in those situations, reunification is the number one plurality percentage that's going on, but it's not the majority. And adoption was maybe 25%. I can't remember where unification was, 30, 38, or some close to 40, I think. And how in the legislature, I know I worked on the bill last year to push for permanency, but maybe the appellate court has a lot of rulings that are pushing for reunification. and so we're kind of at odds. And I think that's something. It's not really related to the financial piece of this, but it does. Those are very time consuming. There's a lot of continuances throughout throughout that process, and how we get better in line with what that means, from the court, legislative. Because I think juvenile court judges are being kind of pulled apart in their decisions. So, food for thought there for the committee too.
Those are good comments, Mr. Chairman. I've been the director of this council since 1995, and the federal guidelines also play. It kind of goes up. At one point, they want reunification with the parent. Then the other points, they come back and say, well, we really want quick permanency. So it's been, and then at some point, it was the best permanency was family permanency, putting them with a family member. So that also has a lot to do with the federal guidelines and where they push us. It just goes up and down over the years. I think now they're concentrating on permanency and not really reunification, or not necessarily permanency with a family member, but let's get some permanency for that child within a certain number of months or a year.
Right.
That's a very good point.
Right. To get one more question. Number 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of the conversation, would you be able to share a little bit more about the grants to counties and whether or not these grants are equitable, right? So, for example, the instance in which you have one juvenile judge over 8 counties with resources being a challenge, or is it just $100,000 block grants per county in which 8 grants would then be available in the instance that you described, or?
No, it's $100,000 per circuit.
Per circuit.
Those circuits that have more than 4 Superior Court judgeships would receive additional grant funding based on the formula, which is a quarter of each Superior Court judgeship is a quarter of $100,000.
Would modifications to how this formula, this grant is provided, allow for additional resources, especially in those counties in which you have fewer resources?
As I stated, when you look at the 100,000 per circuit, and then you start adding more money based on the number of Superior Court judges they have, think about who is that. Those are your big Atlanta, DeKalb. They have the local resources. So you have rural areas that are stuck on 100,000, and believe it or not, there's 4 or 5 judges that is all they're getting, and the counties are not even adding any money to that. And then we have counties and judges that are lucky where the county is adding enough to make it a decent salary. So a formula that would be equitable or could distribute the money, I don't know how, it's been talked about since 2000, how to do that would really help your rural areas where the resources are lacking.
I think to one of my colleagues' questions as well, in terms of the time it takes for a case to be processed or the average time, I think comparing, rural versus metro jurisdictions would also be enlightening for purposes of maybe, tweaking the formula as needed. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you guys so much for your time. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, committee.
And then all right, next up is Prosecuting Attorney's Counsel, Mr. Pete Skandalakis, Herb Cranford, Sarah Chapur, and Chris Jones. And I'm sorry, Sarah, if I messed that up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I will be as brief as possible. I know y'all are tired probably already. If you look at 8.3, the only thing we're requesting is to provide funds for 4 assistant district attorney positions in the Coweta Judicial Circuit that were transferred to. Oh, let me introduce Sarah Japor. I'm sorry. Sarah Japor is the new DA for the West Georgia Judicial. She's the new and the first DA for the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. So we brought Sarah up here so she can see how this process works. And Well, I'm hoping by bringing her up here, y'all be nice to me. That's what I'm hoping, you know. So she'll think the first time is easy, okay? So, and of course, y'all know Herb Cranford and Chris Jones, the CFO, is behind me back there. So if you look at 8.3.1, provide funds for assistant district attorney positions in the Coweta Judicial Circuit that were transferred to the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. When the House passed the budget last year and when the circuit was split, the Coweta Circuit was split to Troop, Coweta, and Meriwether. The West Georgia Circuit is Carroll and Heard County. And so traditionally and by statute, that's a statute I passed out to y'all, 15-1828, Section A. You'll notice that it requires, or the statute sets forth, that whoever keeps the circuit keeps the assistant DA positions. However, when this went over to the Senate took 4 positions from DA Cranford and transferred them to the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. We're asking that the legislature place those 4 positions back with DA Cranford. And then, of course, we'll have to go before the Senate and make that same request. But we think the statute's clear on its face. Traditionally, that's the way it's been. And then what also happens is, as the legislature approves additional positions, if one circuit has more positions than the legislature has approved, we simply don't fund that position for that circuit. So, for example, the Augusta Judicial Circuit that y'all split a couple of years ago into Augusta and Columbia. Since Augusta kept the name Augusta Judicial Circuit, Jared Williams got to keep all those assistant DAs. Since he kept all those assistant DAs, if the legislature ever decides to fund additional state-paid ADAs, we would look and see who has additional DAs based upon circuit splits, and we wouldn't fund that position. So that's why we're asking those 4 positions be funded. The next one.
Before you proceed, hold on, we got Chairman Gunner.
The 4 were taken by the Senate.
Yes, sir.
Out of Coweta and put over in the West. Is that right?
Yes, sir. West Georgia Judicial Circuit.
Was that in addition to the ADAs that were already assigned, I guess, in the bill that created the circuit?
The bill that created the circuit only provided funding for $54,000, which is Ms. Japour's salary for 2 months.
Okay.
I don't know how that oversight occurred, but it did occur. However, we decided that Ms. Japour needed to be a full-time district attorney, so we are funding her salary currently under our budget surplus in the DA program. And that leads me to the next one. And I'll come back, but I just want to tie in 8.3.2, provide 1 district attorney, 1 investigator, 2 secretaries, and travel costs for the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. We're currently covering that under surplus, so I would ask that you strike that from the amended budget, because if we don't, we have 30 vacant positions now, ADA positions, and I think another 8 or 10 administrative investigative positions. We're projecting a budget surplus, so we think we can continue to fund these positions for DA Japour until June 30th. And we'll be asking for additional funds in the FY26 budget. And then provide funds to provide 1 assistant district attorney position for the new judgeship in Tifton. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you. I have a couple questions, but Representative Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My question was appreciate using the surplus funds better than us switching money back and forth. But you mentioned that you'll have those surplus funds because of sounded like 30 or maybe even 40 vacancies in ADAs plus investigators.
Yes, ma'am.
Are those vacancies that you're okay with, or those are vacancies that we need to fill?
We're not okay with those vacancies, but we've been unable to fill them. We've carried 30 vacancies in the ADA position, the assistant district attorneys, since about 2020.
And are the vacancies difficult to fill because of the pay rate or other reasons that we might want to address in the big budget?
Pay is one of them. We're trying to get our starting pay up for assistant DAs. Our survey shows, though, that about 55% of our ADAs that are currently employed have 12 years or more experience, but we want to be able to retain those and keep those. So pay is one thing. Also, geographic location's another. Obviously, outside the metro area that is able to supplement state pay and also pay county ADAs more money, we're having difficulty filling those positions.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I'll start with A31. And I know we talked about this, putting those positions back. As a non-lawyer, and I got to read this law here, it takes me a little bit longer to glance at it. It's difficult to say, hey, your caseload is half, but you get, or whatever it is, it should be about half, but you get double the staff you would need. It's just not good logical sense theoretically. I don't think. I don't know the background behind it, about why it was pulled last year, whatever. It's just difficult as a non-lawyer to look at that in any other aspect of the world and say that makes sense.
Well, Mr. Chair,
a law saying it needed to happen.
And I understand that, but if we had a formula that was based upon reality instead of this antiquated formula that we've come up with, that one ADA per judge, and if you look at the workload, your caseload isn't really halved just because you split a circuit. That's not the way it really goes. As
half of what it was, though.
No, sir. I would not say that, because when you look at what an ADA is supposed to do, from the time a police officer calls for information to the time you have the case to the time you go to court, and all the complexities now that deal with discovery and all those issues, the jobs become much more labor intensive. And one of the things I've tried to point out in all the commissions that I've been before and the committees I've been before is this old formula of one ADA per Superior Court judge is no longer a good way to fund the court system, the state court system. And particularly where you have, as the juvenile court judges were talking about earlier, you have these multi-counties where you have a tremendous amount of time spent going from county to county. But the work of an assistant DA, just like the work of a public defender, is labor intensive. You have got to be in the courtroom, but when you're in the courtroom, somebody else has to be preparing that case for either grand jury or an accusation. Somebody has to be prepared to go to hearings, to motions, prepare you for trials, talk to witnesses. It is very labor intensive. So when you're talking about the fact that you've split a circuit for a couple of reasons, population-wise and case-wise. But I would be hesitant to say that your caseload has been halved.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, along those lines, just to be, I guess, open or transparent about it, I know that the 4 positions I was asked to return to Carroll, and we did, were based on the formula where you get one ADA per judge. 4 of our judges are now judges in the West Georgia Circuit. And, I'm relying on this statute and hoping I can convince all of y'all to let me keep these 4 ADAs for the reason he said. The state funding formula doesn't give me enough ADAs to handle our caseloads. So right now, I haven't looked in a couple months, but we've got something like 600 cases per ADA, and if you would evaluate this at least just as to my circuit, we're a circuit that we don't decline to prosecute drug cases. We don't, as some kind of policy, go light on certain crimes. We try to be fair, but I think we're one of the tougher circuits. We've had the most people sent to prison on gang convictions in the state of Georgia the last 6 years. So I'm wanting this just because I need more ADAs, and this is a vehicle to do it. And I'll put them to good use is one point I want to make to y'all. But yeah, one state paid ADA per judge is, no judge would be satisfied with one ADA in there. It's not enough to do business. So that's,
yeah, I think we agree that none of the district attorneys probably have enough ADAs, especially the ones that have a lot of cases per ADAs. Yeah, we agree with that, and I appreciate your hard work down there. I'm not trying to diminish your hard work and the work that you do down there. It's just you have one circuit and you split it, and you have the judges there. It's just a difficult one outside of this law saying, and maybe it says that you need to carry those over, not from a non-lawyer. So that's all I'm trying to say there. But I appreciate your hard work down there. I appreciate everything you're doing down in that circuit.
If I may, I think one of the reasons it's difficult to understand is because of the formula. And if the formula is wrong, then everything comes tumbling down. So I agree with it is difficult to understand, but that formula simply doesn't work anymore. And it's a formula. I've been a DA. Well, I was a DA. I joined the DA's office in 1984. This formula was in place prior to 1984. I've been doing it longer than Mr. Gunner over there. So I don't know where the formula came from. I don't know how it came from, but since 1984 to 2025, things have changed dramatically in the criminal justice system, yet that formula has not changed once. And I would bet there's been no other place, criminal justice system included, where you haven't looked at a formula and said, does that really work anymore? Does what worked in the 80s work in 50 years later, 20, 40 years later?
There's plenty. I promise you there's more than you guys.
Okay.
Chairman Gunner's next.
Thank you. I think the origin of that probably was where, as the DA, as the judge traveled around in the circuit, they had a DA travel with them. I think that was the reason for that. And it doesn't make sense today. I agree with that. Tell them what the starting pay is for a ADA.
So
Brand new.
State paid, I believe, is right at 60 is where we're starting.
58.
60 to 580.
60, yeah.
Okay, 60. And what you're talking about is the complexity of cases as well. Is that right? That adds to the burden.
The complexity of cases, the requirement for discovery, making sure everybody has, for lack of better terms, crossed their T's and dotted their I's, making sure every case is reviewed to determine whether or not that case, what should be done with that case. Should it be negotiated, dismissed? Should it be, is it a trial? Things of that nature.
Yeah, so this is probably a poor example, but a simple battery versus a DUI, would that be a...
I've said this 100 times. I will try 10 homicide cases before I'll try one DUI.
And
it
I
is
agree.
so complex to try a DUI case. Just give me a good old-fashioned homicide.
Exactly.
And one final point, if I may, the state funding for DA's offices disproportionately helps rural offices. So even my office, I'm kind of Metro Atlanta, but I've got Meriwether and Troop. My highest paid ADAs are in the state positions, whereas in the urban areas, Metro, their lowest paid ADAs are in the state positions. So, again, maybe I look selfish or something, but if I can keep 2 of these state paid ADAs that I've been asked to shift over, that makes a huge difference to my office, because those are going to be 2 of the higher paid positions in my office, and that's where I can try to keep somebody longer term, because my counties aren't giving me the resources that the more metro counties are. So, I'm kind of begging here, I guess, but this would make a huge difference to my office, even if it comes kind of arbitrarily as a result of a circuit split.
Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly don't want to be part of taking ADAs away from any circuit, and I appreciate your concern, and I think you're doing your job by coming here and begging or however to get what you need, because this is a public safety issue, and that's paramount. But we should fix the problem long term, and so I guess my request, or it's a little bit of an inquiry. First an inquiry. Has there been a proposal to change the formula? And if so, when was the last time? And if not, could y'all do that? Because let's just do it right.
PAC has not made such a request, but we'll be glad to work on it and see what we can come up with. And we're always cognizant of the fact that all the state positions, the DA program budget is 98% salary, and it's subject to appropriations. So we're cognizant of the fact that, that these 4 positions that were transferred are subject to appropriations. We have not done what you've asked, but we can do that. It would take some time, but I think we could do that.
I think it would be great, and I know that this General Assembly has said many times our commitment to public safety, and so I would hope that all my colleagues would join in putting resources there rather than other places that we've seen money go potentially to try to make y'all's job a lot harder by investigating y'all at every turn. So I, for one, look forward to that request and hope that we can support you for the good of the safety of the citizens of the state.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. You wave? Good. Representative Holcomb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the volume, if I heard you correctly, you said that on average there's about 600 cases per ADA?
In my office.
In your office. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of what it is statewide?
I don't. I know I've talked to other DAs that they're in the hundreds as well, 400, 500, from what I've heard from other DAs.
Which seems completely unworkable. Like, just by the time that you get it, you're at a point of making a decision, as opposed to being able to thoughtfully think through, how do we want this to be adjudicated? And the point about murder cases is well taken, and I think the state generally does a pretty good job in terms of prosecuting murders, and we have good clearance rates on that, which makes sense because it's the most grave crime that there is. But then I'm concerned about the drop-off from homicide to other crimes, because my understanding is for non-fatal shootings, the clearance rate is closer to like 10 or 15%, which is probably a function of many variables, to include just the bandwidth to bring these cases quickly to trial. Fair or not fair?
I think that's right. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time probably, but to try to narrow down, when someone dies, for all the obvious reasons, there's an incredible amount of resources from law enforcement. We do what we have to do to go to that scene and to be involved from day one. When there's quote unquote just a shooting, when somebody survives, and there are more of those, in part maybe because there are good surgeons around the state of Georgia, but it just gets less attention off the cuff, and tracking down witnesses that don't really want to cooperate, doing the search warrants for social media and all these intensive things. I think it's harder for everybody involved to focus on those cases just because there aren't the resources. And where our backlog is, it's not on serious violent felonies, sex crimes, because for the reasons you said, we do what we have to do to focus on those. But it's all the other things in the state of Georgia that are still felonies that deserve to be prosecuted and people held accountable, even if we're not seeking incarceration. That's where, at least in my office, and I think some other DAs, those are falling behind. And that has its own effect on the community and safety. Even we're getting to them 3 or 4 years down the road, and those people are often out on bond, and how many times have they been rearrested? We've seen a lot of cases of rearrests on less serious stuff that we just can't dedicate the resources to.
Is it fair to say that some of those aren't even being prosecuted, just delay, and they just kind of get forgotten about it, just because not forgotten about, but just not, they're always on the pile and they don't make it in terms of getting into the courtroom and having finality? Like, do some of them just sort of die on the vine?
I think the answer to that is yes. As a former DA, and one of our now retired judges told me when I first started prosecuting, he said something like 99% of the time time delay is to the defendant's advantage.
Yep.
You know, and like we've never recovered from COVID, so a lot of my backlog is just derivative of COVID. In the 5-county Coweta circuit that split as of January, the last time the Coweta circuit closed out more cases than it brought in was 2011.
And who was DA?
You know, some guy, but you know, and so that, and to me, like my analysis, that's a resource issue, you know, and so it goes back that long in our circuit, then COVID hit us. But yeah, the delay is victims get exasperated and they say, I'm done with this, or they move. Witnesses you lose touch with, you know, and an officer might take a job in some other state and you got to try to convince them to come back. So a lot of that is just the age of the case makes it more difficult to pursue. Yeah.
And I'm bumping on 700 a person if I were full, which I'm not. I have 4 attorneys in my office and 4 judges, so I have a full caseload.
700.
Yes, sir. And I just came from the Tallapoosa circuit for 3 years, and when I worked in the Tallapoosa circuit, I had almost right around 700 cases.
That's not workable.
Yeah. I think there's some, you know, national standard. It's talked about more in the context of public defenders, I think, but it's something like you're supposed to have like 200, 250.
That's a lot, but I
lawyer.
could see that
Yeah.
being workable.
Yeah.
700 just seems like you're drowning, always.
Yeah. So 2 to 4 additional ADAs would be a huge deal for my office.
Thank you.
All right. I do have one quick question related to change this up slightly. 833 is for the assistant district attorney position in Tifton. I don't think that started in July. That started in August 1st for whatever reason. It's a little bit behind, but that wasn't prorated in that number, right?
Was it prorated?
The number we're requesting is prorated for the August 1st.
It's prorated for August? Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all.
Thank you, committee members.
And up now is the Georgia Public Defender Council. Mrs. Ali and Mr. Rayford. Welcome.
Hey. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mataya Ali for the Public Defenders, and this is the Executive Director. And Terry Rayford is here for our Chief Financial Officer. And thank you all. Good to see you all again. And thank you, Chairman.
Okay. We're on page 51, section 37. So for the first program, 37.
Will you move that microphone to her?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
For our first program, we're GPDC is not requesting anything for the first program, but for the second, public defender, starting at 37.2.1, increase funds for a juvenile conflict division manager position. The amount is $226,517. Next one is 37.2.2, provide fund for 1 public defender, 1 investigator, and 2 administrative positions for the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. That's $181,797. Last but not least is to reduce funds for 1 assistant public defender in the Judicial Council due to SB 347 not passing. That's
I'm sorry, $61,188.
Great. And so, on the juvenile conflict division manager position, that's something that was funded not in the big budget last year, but in supplemental budget, and basically you're trying to back pay that position. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
And do you know why it was not funded in the?
Just an oversight. It's actually needed.
Move that microphone. Sorry. Thank you.
It's actually needed. For example, the case that happened in Brazelton, we're actually defending the child, the juvenile, and just the salary alone will cover for that case because it's public, it's well known, and if we were to conflict it out, it would not be the salary. It would be more.
And so, and what money have you filled so far? I know you're looking for the supplemental, so we're a month into it. What money have you filled that salary? You did not hire the position, or you didn't let that position go, right? So you filled the position.
We filled the position last fiscal year. The employee is still here. He's doing the case. We're just using current funds, hoping to get it filled.
So it wasn't like a surplus. It wasn't like a surplus like the district attorneys were talking about. As far as you guys, there's a surplus somewhere. You're just filling it in, hoping.
Yes, we just, wherever we can find any amount of money, we just rubbing Peter to PayPal until everybody's paid.
Okay. Got a couple questions, and I'll reserve mine. I'll start with 25. Super chat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Can you tell me what does a juvenile conflict division manager do?
So when you have multiple defendants in a particular case, the CPD's office, which is the big circuit office, will take one. And, by law, we have to conflict all of them out and find separate attorneys for the individuals who are involved in that. If it's, let's say, for an example, 50, no, maybe not 50, 10 young people in one particular indictment, the CPD for that particular county will take one. And then the remaining 9, we have to find attorneys for them. What we're trying to do with this particular unit is to make sure we have someone who can coordinate all those CPDs, all those conflict attorneys, and as well as train the attorneys that we bring in to make sure that we can be there for that limited and very tight timelines.
Very good. So the conflict manager is managing the attorneys that are putting up the defense. Is that right?
Yes, they are putting up the defenses as well.
Oh, they're also.
Oh, yeah, they are. They're in court. They have a huge caseload too.
Okay, and then I was moving on to, so this is one position for $226,000 for a year. Is that for the year?
So that's the position plus the benefits.
Plus the benefits.
Everything. Okay. The position itself is 132, I believe.
I was just juxtaposing those two, for the next line item, the public defender, 1 investigator, and 2 administrative positions is 181. Is that for 1 year for all 4 of those folks?
That is for.
That's for 6 months.
For 6 months.
That's just for 6 months.
That's for 6 months. All right. Well, that makes a little more sense to me. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Generally, my understanding is that they 70% of the cost typically is extras. So when you're looking at the numbers, just keep that in mind for benefits. Representative Holcomb. Oh, I'm sorry, Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I was curious, just based on the conversation that we just had with the prosecuting attorneys folks, are y'all working off a formula similar to what the prosecuting attorneys have, 1 per judge?
We are. That's the statutory provision that we have.
So, and it also hasn't been revisited, I'm assuming, since the 80s?
I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That was what I inherited, and that's what we've been working on.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know who was next. I think Judge Gunner was next.
Okay. Thank y'all for being here. Okay, so I'm remembering the adult system conflict management that y'all have in place. Is this similar to that? Is
It
it
is.
set up the same way?
It is similar. We just don't have that many for the juvenile, for the juvenile conflict. We're hoping to build up in the future, but that's what we have right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, we just have that one right now. We could use more, but that's what we have right now.
Vice Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the work y'all do.
Thank you, sir.
I'm a big believer in trying to keep the scales of justice balanced. What is a starting salary for a public defender?
So ours is 72 for starting, but is inclusive of all the supplements that they get from their county. Ours is not just state. So when we gathered to appropriations in 2023, and it gave us money to retain and hire, we went in there and tried to see how much money we can push our public defenders to. We got to between 68 and 72, and we included all the supplements that they get from their counties. So it's not just straight state that you see.
So does the state appropriate $72,000 for every public defender starting out?
Well, before 2023, I think it was about 58. When we got the two funds in 2023, we had to apply that because that was the purpose for which it was given, and that's what pushed us to that. But what we did to get up to 72 was we looked at what supplements they're getting from their counties, and that's what you see. So it's not just all state.
So some are getting $60,000 from the state and $12,000 from their county?
That would be correct.
And then if there's not a local supplement, then we just give them 72?
Because it was only about four attorneys that went out at that point at that time. So we increased it to 72 for equitable reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea of what, if we were to compare the state funded for an ADA and a public defender? How those scales line up right now?
If you will if we have an opportunity to look at what supplements they get, and then we'll be comparing apples to apples.
Okay.
But I don't have access to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chet.
Right when I stopped asking questions, I came up with another question. How are we, Prosecuting Attorneys Council mentioned us being down 30 prosecutors or ADAs. How are we doing with public defenders?
So ours is a hybrid system. We have state, we have counties. So with the state, I did not check that. I'm sorry if I came in this morning because it's a moving target. And we'll check with the counties too. But I don't know how many we have as of this very moment. But what we do is we will seek the services of contractors, independent contractors, to make the day go by.
So is it safe to say that we have some vacancies?
Oh, we always have vacancies. I just don't know that it's as bad as it used to be 4 years ago.
Very good.
It's not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Holcomb.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. Can you give us a sense of the average caseload?
For each attorney?
Yes.
So it depends on the county. Some counties have a very, very high caseload, some not as high. So if I'm going to say an average, I don't know that it'd be fair to the counties with lower, because then you're kind of projecting on them. I'll say it shouldn't be more than 150. I hope not at this point.
And what about on the high end? Is it 700 like we heard for prosecutors?
Isn't it active cases?
And so what we have is we have active cases and we have inactive cases. We started the system last year where we're looking at active cases and inactive cases, and that's to help our attorneys manage their caseload better. But I don't believe we have We could have some 700 in some places, but I hope not.
Can you give me the 30-second distinction between active and inactive? How you define that?
So inactive cases are cases that probably out on bench warrant that we will not have an opportunity to touch unless the cases come back. We're still keeping them. We're keeping them open. But we're hoping that our attorneys, when they have inactive cases, that those will not be the cases they'll be working on right this minute, that we'll be working on the active cases more. And we just did that not to discount the fact that we have a lot of cases. We do. But it's just to help, it's just a management process for our attorneys.
Okay. Two other questions, if I may. One is, how is your turnover within the attorneys and staff?
It's gotten much better.
Okay.
It's got extremely, really much better since the last time I think we spoke to you about it.
Can you give us a sense in terms of quantifying it?
Maybe between 10 and 15% right now.
Okay.
And the way that we know that it's really getting better is because we don't have a lot of salary savings anymore like we used to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last question is, I think last year one of the real impacts of the budget may have been a couple of years has been these aberrational RICO trials like the one in Fulton County. Is that still an issue, or is that much less so right now across the state? I know the status of the Fulton one is resolved mostly, but
it is still an issue. We're still getting a lot of RICO cases, a lot of multiple defendants that we have to deal with. We keep changing our strategies from one strategy to the other. Right now, what we're doing is trying to bring all the cases back into the building, into our system, because we think we can afford it better if we bring it in, because it's too time intensive for private attorneys, it's too resource intensive, and so we'll see what we can do. But is it a problem? Yes, it is.
And on the funding of that, is it, I recollect you had an arrangement either like by case or by hour. Is that still the case, like $5,000 for some period of the case and then an hourly rate that was like $200 an hour?
We don't do hourly rate.
Okay.
We do per case. If it's a RICO case, our goal is to do $10,000 for the case, and if it's a non-RICO case, we're doing $7,500, and that's double from what it used to be. But the goal is not to contract a whole lot of those cases out because of it's very resource intensive, and we cannot expect our partners, our independent contractors on the outside, really to afford that. The one you talked about in Fulton County, we ended up paying $60,000 for that one case.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also being new to this, this committee and this process, trying to walk me through just a process for how y'all qualify someone to be eligible for a public defender, and how do we ensure that their assets and their income are in the eligibility category?
So we have a process where they apply and they fill a form, mostly when they're at the jail, or even they come to the public defender's office and ask them. I think it's 80% now. 80%. It is 80% of the poverty rate that we do. And they fill the form, they give us the information that we ask for. If they have a job, they tell us how much they're making, and we go by that.
Do y'all verify that income level with the employer? Or do we just take their word on it?
We have pay stubs sometimes, and when they tell us what they do for a living, if someone says I work at McDonald's, I think it's quite like self validated. We know how much they can possibly make, but we don't do beyond that to go to the employers to say how much are you really paying them.
Yeah, that's a good question. The judge said, did they fill that information out under oath? That's
a system that's going on in our public defender's office. I don't know that it's done under oath because I know they do it at the jails and they come to the office to do it. I don't believe it's done under oath. I may be wrong on that.
Okay. All right, that's something we can talk about offline and see.
I'm-
I know the work y'all do is important, and I know, we're dealing with limited resources, and some of it's money and some of it's just human capital. And, I just want to make sure that we're preserving those precious resources to the people who actually need them.
And please let me maybe correct myself a little bit. We're going to have 45 circuits with West Georgia. They handle those. Different officers handle the qualification of our clients when they come in. Do they do it under oath? I don't think so, but I will verify that.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I had one or two questions. So I know the prosecuting attorneys asked for 4 ADAs in Coweta. Is there a similar need in terms of any additional public defenders that may be needed in that circuit?
There's always a need for more public defenders because of the caseload. I mean, I was looking at the caseload that came in through Coweta last year when it was still Coweta, and that was over 3,000 cases. But we did not ask for it because we just went with the law. But there's always a need.
And then similar with the new Tifton Judicial Circuit. Is there going to be a request in the big budget, or at least right now, to your knowledge, is that circuit no additional requests I see in
We're basically going with the statute right now, and that's not because there's not a need for it. There's a great need for more attorneys everywhere, but we made our request based on the statutory provisions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you guys so much.
Okay, Chairman and members of this body, thank you so much for having us again.
Thank you
We're
all.
very
Thanks
grateful.
for being
Thank
here.
you.
The meeting's adjourned.